You are listening to the Intercoastal Podcast, part of the Destination Marketing Podcast Network. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Intercoastal Podcast, brought to you from Beaufort, South Carolina. Once again, we have Robb with us today, and we always love having him on because he's full of all the best knowledge about Beaufort. Welcome back, Robb.
Oh, thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, it's always fun to talk to you because of how passionate you are about your destination. Like we were talking about before, this has become like my little dream destination now because of how much we talk about it. So
it has something to do with this little town and this area as a whole. It gets into you, man. It gets into your soul, and we find people from all over who visit maybe one time, maybe 10 times, but no matter how many times they come and go, they love this place. It oozes out of them when they're talking about it. The same thing with me. I mean, when I share my passion for it, I do. I love this area. I love what makes Beaufort, Port Royal, and the Sea Islands not only a great place to visit, but awesome place to live as well. And so, love chatting about it.
Yeah, no, definitely. I would think you'd probably be the best neighbor ever. You'd convince everyone to stay if they ever thought about leaving.
Yeah. Well, that depends. It depends on, what they're in for. And so, my neighbors now and I, we're seeing whose garden can grow the best. And so he won. I'll give Marvin the win there. He won that one.
Shout out to Marvin.
Yep. His tomatoes, they performed a lot better than mine. Although, we are going to try our large watermelon for the first time, I think tonight, as we celebrate birthdays at the house. But other than that, yeah. So Marvin gets a shout out for winning the tomato growing contest, and he's got his hands full when it comes to pumpkin season here. So we're gonna give him a run for his money.
There you go. You gotta take it one vegetable or fruit at a time.
I hear you.
Oh, but watermelon too. I love that. It's a perfect summer fruit.
Well, it is. And listen, we're talking about just, this charm of this area and having great neighbors and all this stuff. And, this is part of that intercoastal lifestyle that we talk about, right? That we just share each and every podcast. We talk a little bit about what makes this place special from a visitor standpoint or from a local standpoint. And it truly is. And that's what the intercoastal lifestyle is about. And I think people who we have heard from who listen to the podcast have asked us a couple of times, so why not intercoastal, which is the waterway here, right? It's the intercoastal waterway. And we're not saying that. We're saying it's an intercoastal with ends, right? And the intercoastal lifestyle, which is something that this life with the tides has its reflection on our life now. And life is kind of guided by the tides here. And we've talked about that ad nauseum, but it is what makes this place special. We only have probably, let's see, I think Beaufort has about 12,000 people in it, and same for Port Royal. So you're talking relatively small, groups of people living in here, less than 50,000, right? That make up this awesome little place. It feels bigger in some cases. It feels like there's a great diverse population here, and people from all over coming to move into the area. You have a lot of natives that live in and out the area, but everybody has a passion for this place, and they want to take care of it, and they want to preserve it, but they also want to share it in certain ways. And those are some of my favorite parts about what makes this little small town amazing. Right now, Natasha, with the situation that we're in with the coronavirus and how it affects people traveling, and they don't really want to go into like this, large city. They want to find these small, kind of off the road destinations, and Beaufort can do that for a lot of people. So in order to do that, we want to share a little bit about this intercoastal life and what that looks like for people as they kind of get an idea. And I can't describe it any better way than how neighborly people are. I can't tell whether the person I'm talking to is a visitor or a local. The visitors know just as much about the area as locals do. And that's what makes this place special, whether they've been one time or 10 times.
I love that. I haven't been there yet, and I just want to go and be like, I fit in.
Yeah.
Because I know so much about it.
That's right. And so you should be able to tell people, where the best place to go see dolphins, right?
Right.
You know, that's my favorite part about being in the coast. And I've shared it here before. Like my daughters and now my sons will grow up actually seeing dolphins swim in the water. They will actually know how to catch blue crab, whether they release them, the females back to the water and keep the males for dinner. They'll know to do those things. They won't have to read about it in a book. They'll get to live that experience. And even getting on the water, knowing the best time to kayak or paddleboard based on the tide. And so visitors coming to the area or locals or people who are relocating to the area, this is part of the charm that makes this place special. It's a sense of community that we talk about a lot, both in our offices or at home. We talk about how special this place makes you feel, whether you've lived here 3 days or lived here, you know, you're your third generation. And it's almost indescribable. It's something you have to experience, and it's one of our open invitations for people to come experience. Come experience what makes this place special, and that is our open invite. Right now, we just ask that you wear a mask.
If that's all you're asking, I feel like that's not too much.
Yeah, travel responsibly, right? And
Exactly.
we want to make sure this place keeps people coming back for generations. And I had a story of we'll say a return visitor came in the visitor center several weeks ago and came in and said the last time I was here, the day dock was not here. And so I was like, oh, okay. So it's, last time here a couple of weeks. He said, no, I was actually here last year. And I said, well, how'd you miss the day dock? He said, we never made it across that side of the bridge. We found too much to do on this side. And I was like, that's amazing that everything is a description based on which side of the bridge you go on. But that's
Right.
exactly what it is. It's these connections across the islands and the different parts that make up this community. And they spent their time in Port Royal visiting Sands Beach and visiting friends and seeing what there is to do in that area. And they didn't even make their way down to see the day dock, which has been here going on 2.5 years now.
That's amazing. That's also a huge credit to everything that there is to do and see, because if they spent their entire time on one side of a bridge, they clearly had a very full trip.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. But he was in there, he was in the visitor center because he had heard about some of our intercoastal gifts that we have in the visitor center.
Okay.
And
Definitely something we should talk about.
yeah, we celebrate a lot of the things here. And one of the things that we have is we have a shirts and hats and stuff like that. But there's something special about the gifts that we have in there. And our intercoastal gifts are completely recyclable, completely recycled clothing. We use a company that uses 100% recycled clothing on there. We take plastics that have been discarded plastics, and the company makes them into shirts and hats and bags. And then we take proceeds that we get from there and we gift them to, whether it be the Port Royal Sound Foundation or one of our eco-friendly organizations here in the community, to help protect the environment even further. Because if we don't protect the environment that we have surrounding our area and give back to it, then how can we sustain it and make it even better than what we exist now? And so some of these gifts, and he was in there and he bought a couple of shirts, and we were talking about that, and that's where the intercoastal conversation came up. We have these gifts that feed back into the programs that do oyster shell recycling or fund some of the sea turtle nest projects out at Hunting Island, or some of the trash pickup on the beaches.
We love that it goes full circle of going back to the community and giving back to the community all the way around, and then seeing it improve it and keep it natural and just taking care of everything. I love that.
And it does. And it goes back to just how we are as a community at a whole. So, and I mentioned that, we want people to come and travel responsibly. Even if it wasn't, a direct correlation to the coronavirus that's happening now, but when you come to a place such as Beaufort and you see the pristine waterways and you see the amount of green space that we have and open space, undeveloped space that are in the area, there's a reason why we want to protect this landscape. Because if we do lose that landscape in any form or fashion, then we've lost a lot of what makes this place special. And
Yeah.
so, from our standpoint, from our organization to our community, to our stakeholders, to the hospitality and tourism industry as a whole, this is one of our main things that we want to relate out there to prospective visitors, that when you come to visit the area, you will fall in love with it so much that you will take care of it. And we can't thank our visitors enough for doing that, that they're willing to give back and share in keeping this place amazing and pristine, and sharing it and taking care of it for the next generation. And that is an ongoing mission that we have. And that's one of the things that we want to share through this Intercoastal podcast, but also through our Intercoastal mantra that we want to live and carry out from our, destination as a whole.
I think that's great. It reminds me, my grandpa always had this saying. He would take us camping or out on hikes, and he would always say, leave nature better than you found it, or leave the place that you came from better than you found it. And I feel like that's kind of what you have going on here. It's like another way of saying that, like, people come and they love it so much that they want to take care of it and they want to preserve it and keep it and make it better than they found it, essentially.
And that's it. That's exactly right. And it's amazing to watch that happen, because you know we we do things in our community that are unique to coastal communities, but they should take this ecotourism next step, right? Things that are
Right.
friendly to the environment. And that's what we want to do. I mean, we are a natural landscape. This natural landscape is beautiful and it is amazing. And it gives us gorgeous bluff views, and it gives us tremendous waterways to paddle up and down. And now this is our part of it from a local constituent to give back and protect it. In order to do that, we have to, kind of keep our mission focused on taking care of what our landscape gives us in return. And I think that's kind of what we do, and that's why we have some of these gifts that are in the visitor guide that highlight the eco-friendliness of the gift itself, whether it's repurposed pottery or recycled shirts, or whatever the case may be. We're grateful for those items, and people come in. And so, as this gentleman who was talking about the day dock, he also reminded me that it's he wanted to give back to the community as well, and this is one of the ways he was doing it.
Right. I love that because it's such a great and simple way for people to be able to give back if they don't know exactly how to do it. Like, it's a great place to start.
I agree with that.
But speaking of keeping everything natural, I think one of the coolest things about the South that I've ever seen is all the Spanish moss hanging on the trees. And I only got a little bit of that when I lived in Florida, but I definitely think that you probably have a lot more of it there in Beaufort.
But yeah, I mean, and it's we do, listen, Spanish moss, to people who don't see it, are fascinated with it. Um, I know that when family visits from other parts of the country and they come in, they want to know if they can take some home with them, right? And it's like, it's funny to discuss because it literally drapes all the trees, outside my window right now, and it's on the trees draped over the roads in town. And so Beaufort has this Spanish moss covered oak trees that make up this cityscape. And no matter where you go in and out, whether it be here in Beaufort or in Port Royal or in the Sea Islands in general, you're going to see the Spanish moss. And this plant has kind of this southern connotation to it, and rightfully
Right.
so. Um, but it also has like use. Like, it used to be what car manufacturers stuffed into the car seats to give them its soft padding, which is
It's
crazy to
crazy.
think of, right?
Yeah, it's something
Uh,
people would never think of or know
Well, that's
unless
right.
they
They used it for packing material or mattress stuffing or some sort of fiber for commercially use in car seats. Um, then they started processing the production of Spanish moss. And then you can use it now into bedding for flower gardens and stuff like that. So, and that's kind of some of that good coverage. But for us, it basically gives us that southern look, right?
Yeah.
And the kind of that southern connotation where you'll see it, and some people call like that southern gothic imagery, where you have it
Right.
draped over the trees, and that's exactly what it is. And it's a really awesome kind of natural landscape that we have, and people come in and they see it and they talk about it, and you can go through the history of writings from explorers to people who settled the area, and they talk about this plant that grows in the trees and gives it this look. And you know what? We call it Spanish moss. Some people call it, padding or bed mulch. Um, but it is something that you can associate with the southern live oak here in the Beaufort area. And it is something you can take. I've always thought that if you wanted to take some home with you, just make sure you get it from the trees and not the ground.
Yeah.
And because you never know what kind of creature may be living in the Spanish moss. Um, but it's one of those natural landscape, beautiful things that make up our area. And I think, as someone who lives here, I see it used for all sorts of things. Mainly, birds use it for nesting or some of that nature. But a good windstorm puts Spanish moss on the ground, but it doesn't deplete the oak line trees that cover the roadways with it. So it's one of those things. I want you, if you've never seen it before, come to Beaufort, you will see it covering the oak trees that line our streets.
It'll definitely add to the southern charm of it
I
because
agree.
I envy it a little bit because, out here, I mean, we have beautiful, like, quaking aspens and pine trees and cactus, but nothing like that. And I feel like it's almost like I remember the first time when I saw some of it when I was in Florida, I was just like, it was almost otherworldly. Like, it was so unique to anything I had ever seen. So I can only imagine, like, Florida's not nearly as, I don't think, dense with it, at least the area that I was, because I was down in Orlando. So it wasn't quite as like filling, or like, what's the word I'm looking for? It didn't populate the area as much as
Right.
other places I've seen. So I can only imagine like how much more like mystical and beautiful that appearance would be in somewhere like Beaufort, where it's right on the coastline and you have all those beautiful trees and all the historic inns. It's like this picture perfect place to go and see.
It is. It does add to that picture perfect imagery that makes up the area. So, um, you know, most of the photographs that you see circulating on social media or whatnot, they're going to contain those components. These moss draped historic structures in the area, or you're going to see people on the bluff, and you'll see the Spanish moss present. And it's funny because it's kind of one of those things it's a star in itself. It makes a cameo in a lot of photographs here in the Low Country, especially in Beaufort area. And people don't know much about it. And you find bits of information that we're sharing here about it on some of our tours. And one of my favorites is Janet's walking tour. Will do it, and she stops and she lets people touch it and feel it, and she talks about it at length, and it's part of her tours. And a lot of our tour companies do that. They interwove it because it is, like I said, a staple within the South, and it's a staple within South Carolina. And it's definitely a staple within our part of the Low Country here. And it's a great neighbors.
That's a fun thing to include in a tour. Like, I don't think I would have ever thought of that, but I absolutely adore that. Like, touching it and physically, like, obviously you expect to see it, but like to actually have the chance to stop and touch it and feel it and just like learn about it in a more in-depth way. Cause I think it's something that, like, yeah, we'll see photographs of back here in the West or anywhere that's basically not the South that doesn't have that. And, we only are like, oh, that's really cool, but we don't really understand it. So getting that little bit of history and education about it is awesome.
Yeah, and I think that's true. It's just like dipping your toes in the water at the beach, right?
Right.
You can feel that sensation now. I'm describing it, dipping your toes in there. You already know what the sounds are, and you can hear the gulls, chirping in the sky behind you. You can hear the waves crashing, and you can almost taste the salt but you know what that feels like when you dip your toe in there. And so having that,
Right.
experience of touching, especially now, for those who have touched it, they know exactly what I'm talking about. It has like the feel of it, and it kind of immerses yourself a little further into our charming little town.
Yeah. What does it feel like? Like, can you explain it? I want to
I
know.
Yeah, it's like a coarse. In some cases, when it's dried out, it's kind of a coarse plant that can feel like a braid, like a thread of yarn, if you will, a little
Okay.
thicker. Some has a consistency. If it's a little bit wetter, can have a thicker consistency to it, where you feel like it's a little heavier. With the moisture, you can feel the moisture come out of it. But when it's dry and hanging from the tree, it's really light and airy, but it has like a coarse texture. Kind of feels like a thread, like a something you would sew a dress with, right? Kind of has that kind of texture to it.
Okay.
That's my
Cool.
description of it.
That I think it described it very well. At least give me something like tangible to imagine what it feels like until I can feel it for
Yeah.
myself. I do want to, we were talking earlier about how, like you mentioned, they use it for packaging and like seats for
Yeah.
cars and stuff. And earlier you mentioned where the saying, work all the bugs out came from. Do you want to go into depth on that?
Well, yeah. I mean, so when they used to pack these cars, one of the lures here that we have in town is that they used to use it in the 1900s, early 1900s, to commercially pad this car seats. And when they filled it up, I mean, when it's on the ground, it can, you know, say that chiggers would find their way into Spanish moss, and therefore people would be driving the cars and they would have these bites on them from driving these new cars with these freshly Spanish moss padded seats. And so people would say you would drive it until you worked the bugs out of the car. And that's where that saying comes from. Again, a little bit of our tour, some of our tour groups and lore that goes along with it.
Yeah, I just thought that was a really fun story when
Oh,
you told
yeah.
me earlier, so I wanted to share it with everyone. But this is also why you don't pick up the Spanish moss off the ground. You get
Yeah,
it from the
I would
tree.
not. Yeah, I would. You never know what critter is going to be looming underneath the Spanish moss. It's a great, like I said, it's a nest for birds. It can be a nest for anything else. Um,
Yeah.
so pull what see, touch what you can see, and pull at what you can see.
Yeah, that I think is wise. Well, I think this has been an awesome episode. Do you have any last things that you want to share with our listeners, Rob?
Well, as always, you can always find this more information on visiting Beaufort, Port Will, and the Sea Islands at beaufortsc.org. You know, go on there and look around. Hit us up on the 50 things to do list. Pick some of those items. We try to talk about bits and pieces of them here on the podcast, and make sure you hit that subscribe button.
Right. I know. I feel like we've barely even scratched the surface of everything there is to do. Because I've gone through that 50 things to do list as well. And I'm like, oh, we're going to have to talk about that sometime. We're going to have to talk about this. So you definitely should go check it out if you haven't already. Thanks everyone for listening and joining us here at the Intercoastal Podcast. We'll see you next time. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and review. This has been another episode of the Intercoastal Podcast, part of the Destination Marketing Podcast Network, hosted by Natasha Lye and produced by the Relic team.